I'm going to speak a bit about trade unions. I'm a proud trade unionist, as well as being a community activist and human rights campaigner. My roots started in the trade union movement, and I'm proud to be a trade union representative. I sit on the TUC Race Relations Committee, on the National Executive of my union, the PCS. I've been heavily involved over the last 20 years in founding black members' structures and fighting for race equality in the workplace and in the trade union movement. And I'm proud actually that there are 3 unions that have sponsored this event today. My own union, PCS, and Unison have stalls at the back there, and also Unite, the union, which is the largest trade union in the UK. And I want to talk about, what we had to go through, start by talking about what we had to go through as black people in the trade union movement. Because the trade union movement, has not always been welcoming of black people in the movement, has not always stood up for race equality. It's actually us as African people, as black people, that have put the race equality into the trade union movement. It wasn't white activists that put the race equality in the trade union movement, and we had to fight the racism within the movement to get the race equality in the movement. And we're not there yet. It's not perfect by any means. And black people had to fight, not just to have a voice in the trade union movement, but we actually had to fight to form black self-organised structures in our own movement. And the first and only black trade union that has ever existed in the UK was formed in the 1920s for workers that were working in the film industry. So they were the workers doing the cleaning and the porters and the administrative roles. And when they went to the TUC, because most unions are affiliated to the Trade Union Congress, when they went to the TUC requesting affiliation so that there would be a recognised trade union, that white movement, as it was then, the TUC turned them down and said, no, we're not going to, because there's already a union for the film industry, so you don't need to exist. Completely rejected and ignored the fact that actually they really did need to exist, because that general trade union in the industry was not representing or inclusive of black people working in it. And initially, we had to fight by standing outside doors and demonstrating. I myself, in a predecessor union, had to issue an open letter to delegates to the main conference, and then they set up advisory committees, and that's after we demonstrated, protest, stood outside the doors of the committees and said, no, we're not going to stand for this. And this is not, when we're talking about history, I'm talking about my lifetime as an adult. I'm not talking about going back before I was born. This is recent history. This is the 1990s we were having this fight, not that long ago at all. And I'm proud to have founded several self-organised structures within the trade union movement, within and without. But in the 1990s, when I went to a former trade union who actually had formed a policy due to a merger with another union that meant they had to set up race equality structures, they told me, no, we can't do that because we're too busy. And it was a white man that was put in charge of setting up the black structure. And then they were forced to invite me to meetings. I was supposed to be co-opted onto a decision-making body, which they wouldn't let me go to. And they said things like, well, you can't come to the meeting because we've only got a small meeting room. We don't think we can put another chair in that room. So, it was like block, all the way that we had to go through. So as a result of that, I set up my own organisation. And really, it was only ever supposed to be for my sector. And I called it ethnic majority, because we are not a minority. And yesterday, one of the speakers talked about, I am not BAME, I'm not BME. And I reject that term, and I'm glad that our black members in PCS have insisted that we call black members and not be anything else. We're black. It's a unifying term that brings us all together. So I set up the organisation and we named it. And initially, this was me, one, fighting for this structure. So I had to fight to get other black people to fight with me. So it was a big struggle because I didn't necessarily see it as significant or important. But then what happened is when we formed majority, everybody from across my union wanted to join up to this organisation, and it forced the hands of the people in the leadership, which was a right-wing leadership of the union at the time, to set up the black structures. But even when they did, they imposed a white chair. So essentially they're saying that we as black people are not capable of chairing our own committee. But really it's because they wanted to be there and have a presence and watch what we were doing, monitoring what we were doing. So what we bring as black activists, when we fight for race equality, actually that improves the situation and equality for everybody across the board, including white people. So actually, we must remember that when we set up black equality structures in trade unions or wherever we set them up, we benefit everybody. Everybody benefits when there's equality. Not just the people that are receiving the most discrimination. In fact, when the Race Relation Amendment Act came about, the first people to bring cases to the courts were white Scottish people, not black people, and successfully bring their claims. So we should remember that. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the Race Relations Act. And 50 years later, it seems to me, many days of my life, that we're going backwards, we're not going forwards. And we mustn't forget that the Race Relations Act came about because black community activists and ordinary black people came together to fight a campaign against the Bristol bus boycott led by Paul Stevenson. And the Bristol bus boycott imposed, the bus company in Bristol imposed a colour ban which said that black people couldn't be employed to work on the buses. And Paul Stevenson, together with community activists in Bristol, formed a campaign, and actually it was supported by high-profile people like Tony Benn, who was the local MP at the time, and they campaigned and they marched. So when people think about the Montgomery bus boycott, how many of you know about the Bristol bus boycott? So not everybody in this room. You see, and that's what makes me sad, because our history is not being taught in this country. It's not being taught in our schools. It's not in the history books. We should have to fight for our people here, our sisters and brothers, to know that story. So I'd say to you, go and Google it and look it up. How many of you knew about the Montgomery bus boycott? So far more people knew about what happened in the USA, when at the same time this was happening in the UK and people don't know about it. And that's another fight, which is not for my discussion today, in terms of how our history is taught and documented and shared. And it took until the 50th anniversary, a couple of years ago, for the union that was involved at the time, who supported the bosses on the basis that they said, oh, if we let black people come and work on the buses, then it's going to reduce hours and reduce work for white workers, so we'll back up the bosses. And it took them until 50 years later, when there was some publicity around the 50th anniversary, for them to actually apologise for what they did. 50 years later, and that was really generated not by them of their own accord, because of the media coverage of the 50th anniversary. And our history is being hidden from us, but we need to document our history. We need to share our history. We have a proud, roots of being griots, and we need to reignite that and pass that down the line. So, if you look at all the things that we've had to fight for, even that wasn't a trade union. They were out with the trade union movement, but they were fighting for workers' rights in the workplace. I think it's really atrocious that I see every day white activists in the trade union movement and more broadly on the left who are passionate about fighting fascists. Yeah, so they'll say they're anti-fascist, they campaign against fascism, they'll go out to demonstrations on the street. But But not all of those same people that will go and fight fascism will challenge the racism they see in their workplace. Not all of them will challenge the racist joke that's told in their local pub that they go to. Or when they see their neighbour or people in their communities being abused or spat at or on the street, they turn and look the other way. So when they say they're proud anti-racist, they're not proud anti-racist, because if they really understood about racism, they would be challenging the everyday racism that we face. And that's what we're seeing happening at the moment, that those who hold racist views are being more empowered to express those racist views. And that's been led from the likes of UKIP, from a government that has a racist agenda. And we know that in times of austerity, racism increases, and that in turn empowers individuals who, so over the 50 years we've had all these policies and we've had all this legislation that protects us from racism. What it's done is suppress what people really feel in terms of them expressing it, because they don't feel empowered to express it now because of the racist policies we're seeing driven through by this government. And it's not just this government, it's, the mainstream parties have supported a lot of these policies. If you look at the Immigration Act, which is the most racist piece of legislation I've seen in my lifetime, which seeks to create an apartheid-like state in the UK and the return of the no blacks, no Irish, no dark signs, that was largely supported by all of the main political parties when it went through Parliament. And there's an even more racist Immigration Act bill that's coming through. So, as much as I fought racism in the trade union movement, in the workplace, and I'm proud that my union is a progressive union and is a supportive union. In fact, the work that I do as a community activist in terms of justice campaigns, family justice campaigns, my union has supported and backed up those campaigns. I recognise that actually trying to just organise against racism in the workplace wasn't enough. We needed to go further than that. So in 2010, Lee and I founded Black Activists Rising Against Cuts, which was a national anti-austerity movement, because we knew that the cuts were going to have a disproportionate impact on black communities, workers and service users, and that they were going to amplify racism, and hand in hand with the disproportionate impact of austerity on black people, what we've seen is an increase of racism and an increase of injustice. So our remit as an organisation has widened. And Colette, who's jogging up those stairs and Pete's disappearing out of our sight because she's busy running around doing everything, I'm very, very proud of her. With Maurice, she is the chair of Barrack Manchester, and she works tirelessly on our behalf in Manchester. And we're really, really fortunate that we have activists up and down the UK that are running Barrack and campaign vigorously to challenge racism and injustice and austerity and cuts. And if it wasn't for those activists, we wouldn't be able to exist. So I want to pay tribute to all of them while I'm up here. And Barrack brought together community activists and trade union activists in a way that we haven't seen done before. Because I felt, and Lee felt, it was important that what we're facing is cuts left, right and centre, racism left, right and centre. We can't fight that just being, working in silos in a community organisation, in a trade union. We need to bring everybody together. So that was the aim of it, that we bring everybody together, which is why here in Manchester, Colette comes from a community activist background, Maurice comes from a trade union background, from my union. And we fight together, but yes, we have to fight every day, and that makes me, really sad. Even in terms of the anti-austerity movement, they don't often think or always think about the race aspect of what we're facing. And if we weren't there, part of what we do is to try and have a voice and put that message out there, that we are here. This is impacting on us, and you need to include us in what you're doing, but sometimes we have to operate and act separately and organise our own things, because we can't depend on the broader movements to always be inclusive of us. Lee mentioned that the convoys to Calais that we have organised. We're part of an organisation called Convoys to Calais. But in September, and we're now sort of going every 2 or 3 weeks to Calais to bring aid, to bring solidarity. But in September, Barak, together with the Nation of Islam, went on a fact-finding visit and a solidarity visit to Calais. And what we discovered is that the African communities that are stuck there in limbo as refugees in Calais make up the majority of what's called a camp, which is known as the jungle, which isn't a camp, it's a shanty town that's been built because the French authorities don't want to provide facilities. Am I running out of time? Okay. This is what happens when you stop sharing, you forget about the time. So I'm going to end and say, please support the work that we're doing with Convoys to Calais, because what we also discovered is all the things that Lee said, that they're not contributing and bringing things for the African communities, and 60% of the people there are from Sudan. There's also Ethiopians, Eritreans, and they were saying to us, we need cornmeal flour, we need dried fish, we need saltfish. The aid that's coming is, you know, some tin of tomatoes and some onions and a banana, whatever else is in there. This is not catering for our needs. We met a woman that said, since I've been here, my hair's fallen out. Can you bring me a wig? Can you bring me some African hair products? Can you bring us some coconut oil for our skin? Because nobody's considering what their needs are. So we've set up a fundraiser. What's it called? What are we on? GoFundMe. I set it up and I can't remember what it is. It's on GoFundMe. You can speak to me after, I can give you the details. Please, if you can donate any funds, on the 7th of November we will go again. And as much money as we've got in that GoFundMe account will go towards bringing the products that people need. We also found that African people are having to walk for 3 hours to go and pick up firewood, to make a fire, to cook food. With the weather, you know, that's not going to work. So one of the things we did when we went a couple of weeks ago is we took cooking stoves and calabash. So that's one of the other things that we're trying to fundraise. I'm running out of time, I have run out of time, and I'm going to end there. But what I want to finish by saying is that we must, as much as I've talked about doom and gloom, I think we must celebrate the fact that it is African black people that put the race equality into the trade union movement. At the start is that I'm also an artist, a curator, and a performance poet. And some of my art, I've put a pop-up art exhibition at the corner. Please do go and have a look at it before you leave. I want to call Colette up here. I want a nice picture of me and my sister, or 3 or 4 nice pictures of me and my sister. Thank you. Colette has worked tirelessly. She hasn't eaten, breathed, slept. She told me, what was it, yesterday or the day before, I haven't even got toilet roll in my house. I haven't eaten any food because I'm working, so, you know, I have to run around and do lots of things. She's met so many challenges to put on this conference. She's overcome those challenges. And I'm telling you now, yes, we had Stephen, we had David, we must pay tribute to them as well in terms of their role in the wider committee. But I'm telling you now that we would not be here, standing here, sitting here today in this event if it was not for this woman, my sister here today.
First of all, I must catering and the food. We're just running a little bit late for that. And like Zita said, you know, I haven't been on my own. About 3 years ago, myself and my colleague Deka and Zerabi, sorry, I'm taking off my glasses, Deka and Zerabi, both of us are politically active in Manchester, and Deka runs for the Green Party, and I've stood as a candidate, for an independent candidate for local council 3 times now, because the political agitation here in Manchester has died. You know, when you think of 1945, 70 years ago, that 96 people came here to Manchester to put on a congress that changed the world forever. And now we're here in Manchester, and the politics, we've got 96 councillors in the city council, and not one of them is black. Our economics is dire, our culture is dire. You know, we had a campaign last year to bring the carnival back to Moss Side, and we, you know, we went out in the rain, and people signed petitions, we were on the radio and everything else and that. But I mean, that campaign for me was a great campaign, because it showed that people power, you know, people standing together, wanting to do something for the community, to bring back the carnival, the culture, the economics, back into the community that won. And this year, in 2015, the carnival, after 44 years of being in Moss Side and then taken out to Patfields Park, was brought back into our community. So 3 years ago, we set out a campaign. We did, in 2013, we did a Say It Loud campaign, started in October, and did a 10-week art campaign, just trying to bring politics back into the community. That was successful. Last year, 2014, as you know, was the 100th anniversary of the First World War, and we wanted to talk about our story, how the First World War impacted on Africa, how many Africans died in that First World War, and what the effect of that was. And we put in a funding bid to the Heritage Lottery Fund, and though we wanted to do the campaign last year, about 6 weeks ago, we got news from the Heritage Lottery Fund that bid was successful. So we're going to be doing some work on Africa and Africans, and about how they contributed, how we won the First World War. And then this year, obviously, we wanted to make sure that the 70th anniversary of the 1945 Congress didn't come and go without us celebrating. And what's happened in the past is that we've had celebrations before. We've had the 50th anniversary, we've had the 60th anniversary, and by the admission of Dr. Paula Koji, who was involved in both of those anniversaries, what happened there, that it was very top heavy, it was very city council led, it was very academic led, so there's no legacy. And what we wanted to do this year was to make sure that it was community led, and that we put on an event not just to commemorate that day, but to also to make sure that we take actions forward, that we strategize, that we look at our politics, that we look at our economics, that we look at our culture, that we look at the older generation within our communities, the younger generation, those that are people who have, you know, mental health issues and so forth. And because of the cuts since 2010, all these organisations, all the black organisations up and down the country have faced massive cuts. You know, organisations closed, and also they have to change their agenda. They can no longer call themselves African black organisations. They have to have BME, they have to serve other communities before they serve our communities. And the sad thing about those organisations is, because they're so dependent on funding, because they're so dependent on the government, that they don't say anything, they won't say anything, they can't say anything, and they're so quiet. Yeah, but I say to them, look, either you stay quiet and you go by the wayside, or you come out strong and you fight for what we need in our community. And unfortunately, they stay quiet, so they're all just diminishing at the moment. But hopefully, the tide will change. But like I said, myself, Daniel Davidson, Cantiga, Charles Critchlow, and a number of others started on this journey last year, and there's only myself and Deka left in the organising committee. But thankfully, about 8 weeks ago, we met up again with a gentleman called Robert Kroll, who I met about 2 years ago. Yeah, Robert Kroll is over here. Yeah, Robert Kroll. He came to a reparations meeting and he came on board and he's just been absolutely fantastic. He's been speaking to the young people, and one of the things that I say is, even before yesterday, when we had the event yesterday, that this whole thing was a success, because what Robert and we've managed to do is we've managed to engage with young people. We've got the young people here from Hideaway. They've been absolutely fantastic. Hideaway celebrated their 50th year this year. Shiloh to stand up, please. Yeah, Shiloh's from the Hideaway. When we went to the Hideaway to tell them about what we were doing in the 1945 Congress, Shiloh was like, hold on, that happened in Manchester here. I live here, I've never even known about it. And so what Shiloh said was, you know what I want to do is I want to take that information, I want to put it in an educational resource, and I want to go back into my school and teach the other pupils about the 1945. So even before yesterday, this project, this commemoration was a success. But we just didn't want to commemorate it just to come here for 3 days and just to talk about what happened in 1945 and what's happened in the last 70 years. We want to re-engage, we want to inspire, we want to bring back that determination, that determination of knowing that we can change the world, exactly what they did 70 years ago. You know, if we think about the time that they lived in, you know, no internet and all those kind of things, the oppression, the subjugation, the racism, the discrimination was, you know, so much more in the face, but they managed to do such great things. And whilst I've been doing this as well, I've been reading on those people that were at the conference, and they're absolutely amazing. Ras McConnell was able to finance the conference. Amy Ashwood Garvey was just a remarkable woman. George Padmore, Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, and you know, these people were here 70 years ago, and they went back to their respective countries, Kenya and Ghana, and you know, I think it's very easy to say that once they left the conference, they went back to their respective countries and fought for independence. But just imagine what that was like, you know, fighting the British rule and you know, assassination attempt, building up political parties, fighting that all the time. The amount of sacrifice that they had to make, you know, from their families and everything else and that. And it's just absolutely amazing. So I think we've got a couple more books outside from that Professor Hakeem Addy has written about the 1945 Congress, and they're on sale, special offer, they're only a tenner. So I think we've got about 3 or 4, so you know, buy yourself a copy and read up about the 1945 Congress. But I want Dacre also to stand up, because Dacre has been absolutely fantastic. Dacre? Very shy, Dacre. Okay, yeah. I mean, I know a lot of people have mentioned my name today, but Dacre has been, you know, he's been here, and we've been at each other's side for the last 3 or 4 years, and he's one of the last people I speak to on the phone at night time. I'm on the phone for about an hour chatting about all this stuff and everything else and that, and he's been absolutely fantastic. And I'd also as well like to take this time to thank Lee Jasper and Zita Holborn, who've also been fantastic. When I've been on the phone crying, saying all these things, I could actually just stand here and tell you about the crap that we've been through, yeah, over the last 12 months. Our chair, Dr. Paula Koji, left us 5 weeks ago, taking with him 3 speakers, a venue, and over £1,000 in sponsorship money. And he's also wrecked our relations with other organisations that, you know, that promised us stuff. But you know, we were determined, and I was saying, even if I have to hold this conference in my backyard, this conference is going to go on. Come on, Brother Marcel, stand up. Thank you very much for your guidance. And Brother Marcel made sure that he kept us grounded. You know, he talked about the 1974 6th Pan-African Congress and how he was there, and he kept us grounded as well. And last but not least, I want to thank my family, yeah, because I spend so much time doing things like this, and my family have been absolutely superb, supporting me, guiding me, helping me. My daughter's over there, she's absolutely beautiful. My sister's not here. My sister donated this cake here for us. Sorry, I just wanted to tell you as well, yeah, because I'm a really extremely proud mother. Yeah, my daughter is a master of chemistry. My daughter's a scientist. And there are a couple of people as well. My friend Beverly, who's been in the kitchen all morning, and also okay, and I also think that there's, I also know that what we've been doing over the last 12 months is really important for the community, yeah? Because what we've managed to do for this conference is to bring the University of Manchester and Manchester Metropolitan University Black Students Union, yeah? The General Secretary of the University of Manchester is now Aqua, yeah? She's the General Secretary, yeah? And also is Jordan Stephen, who is the President of the Manchester Metropolitan University, and it's the first time that these two student universities, the Black Student Union, and it's not even black, is it? It's the National Union of Students, have come together and worked in the community, and I'm sure that we'll be working in time to come as well in the future. And I'd just like to say thank you for everybody. Like I said, the food should be here shortly. Yes, and yes, okay. So just like to say thank you all for coming. First Cut Media as well, sorry. First Cut Media, we went to First Cut Media and we said, we haven't got any money. And one of the things that we know is that we do great things in our community, but we don't document it yet. It's very important that we document things. And we said that we needed to make sure that the whole of this conference was documented. And First Cut Media put together a project to work with young people, and we'll be doing a project starting from yesterday. It started yesterday, working with young people, and I think it's in January we should have a documentary about this conference, so you'll be able to purchase a documentary and our documentary for this conference, so make sure that you guys I won't spend too much time thanking everybody. We've given thanks for everybody who's put in work to bring us all together today. So just one more time, thank you to everybody that made this happen. I'm just going to get straight into it because I'm young, I've got a lot to say, and we don't have that much time. So let's start there. The talk is named Youth at the Forefront. It's named Youth at the Forefront for a number of reasons. That can be taken to mean a number of different things. First of all, Youth at the Forefront is, me personally, I'm an advocate for youth-led solutions to our problems, especially problems that are deemed to be youth issues. I feel like there's not enough representation or young people leading movements and leading that change. There needs to be a change there because that's really important. And secondly, you reap what you sow, essentially. So I feel like if we are not investing in the young people today, we can kind of predict with a lot of accuracy that in the next 10 years, we're not really going to see the change that we desire and that we're talking about today. And so we've gathered here clearly to reflect on our history, on our past and our achievements, but we know that we've got a long way to go. And so I want to primarily talk to you about violence. And I think that's because we need to eradicate the violence that's in our community. We shy around it, we beat around the bush, but there's no time to do that because our young brothers are being killed and some of our young sisters have also been killed. And we just need these people because these are our warriors of the future. These are the people that are going to carry the baton forward. These are the people that are going to take this fight into the next few generations, and without them, we're not going to see that happen. Can I get a show of hands? Who here is under 30? That's really good. Like, I didn't actually expect it to be so many. Who here has heard of pan-africanism before today? That's, again, really good. And of those young people, the first people that put their hands up, who was taught pan-africanism by their leaders or, you know, their elders in their community, or predominantly by their parents? Far fewer. I'm going to come to that at the end. So, for me, why eradicating the violence in our community should be our first priority. I feel like the relationship between violence and trauma is not really spoken about enough, and we need to understand where the violence is coming from if we're ever going to tackle it effectively. I just want to give you a few personal examples because we suffer from intergenerational trauma. This is something that is known. Not only do we carry that baggage, that weight, that pain of the past, of our ancestors, from slavery and the subsequent oppression that we have faced, but we are also living in traumatic environments day to day, and this is something that needs to be connected with our previous traumatic experiences. So, using my personal examples, I grew up around violence, to say the least, and I'm sure that a lot of people here will have had the same experiences. Not only was that in my own home, witnessing my own father brutalize my mother, I have to say that out here because we need to speak about what's happening in our homes. We've mentioned it many times today. If we don't have our house in order, how can we expect to have our community in order? First things first. But we never really look to further than what's happening in our own household. So I know a lot of young children experience domestic violence in their household, but it's bigger than that. Because when I would go to escape what was happening in my house and I'd go to my friend's house, I'll see the same thing. And people don't really understand how that affects people. So when I'm leaving to try and find a safe haven, one of my best friends in childhood when we were really, really young, her mum's new partner brutalized her on many occasions. Now she had 4 brothers and sisters. In total, there were 6 of us in that household. And despite the fact that I was not one of their family members, that never prevented this man from putting his hand on this woman. And I have to recall and make it very visual for you, and I don't like doing that, but there would have been 6 of us sitting on a bed, the door would have been ajar, and this happened on many occasions, and we watched him stump and kick her to within an inch of her life more than once. Every child in that room was under 11, and the youngest was 2. Let me just put that out there. Violence becomes such a normal part of our reality, and we become so desensitized to it that we don't actually even recognize that it's going on. I mean, further to that, I remember a game that used to be played on our estate when, you know, the boys would get us in the corridor of the blocks, all the, you know, young girls, and they would barricade the entrances and exits. But before they did that, they threw fireworks in there. We were 11. We had to duck and dive, and literally we did not know if we were going to be safe. I thought I was going to die. That is not a joke. They would let us out, but the fireworks were already bouncing up and down the corridor. Another example, my personal house, there were 6 of us living in a 2-bedroom flat. And so when my youngest sister was born, my mum had to split the living room to make us another bedroom because clearly there was not enough space for everybody. And so one day, a group of boys from the estate decided that they were going to chuck a brick through our living room window, but it wasn't a living room, it was a bedroom, and it came this close to hitting my little sister as she slept in her cot. Of course, my little sister's dad could not contain himself. When he went out there to, you know, confront these young men who had done that, they then proceeded to try and, you know, force their entry into the house, and when they weren't successful at doing that, they tried to put fireworks through the letterbox. These are the kinds of environments that we grow up in. Another show of hands, who has experienced similar things, domestic violence, other kind of traumatic violence that's happening where you live? To be fair, sometimes we don't want to be open and honest about that, but I do think that is more than who just admitted to that right there. That's just my opinion.
These are just a handful of stories I chose to share with you today, and I could have chosen to share any more, you know, a lot more, but I will just say, don't use my stories, these are my examples. Just reflect on your own personal examples, which prove the point that we live in very traumatic environments. How do you expect young people to come through those environments and grow into adults and not exhibit any kind of violence at all? We are not taught how to adequately address our feelings and emotions. We are not taught emotional intelligence. And actually, as a people, we've been told, you know, we're strong. We've suffered for years. We've suffered for hundreds of years. We can cope. We know how to do this. But we don't really know how to do this. And what people do is they suppress it. They build their own coping mechanisms. I mean, Viv, who spoke before me, gave some really, you know, traumatic, you know, examples of what he had been through. And I think one thing that really caught my attention when he said that is that we suppress those things, and sometimes they might become triggered at later stages. But ultimately, as an adult, if you have not dealt with the trauma in your childhood, the trauma that has led you into adulthood and formed the way you behave as an adult, how can you expect your children to do the same? They're not going to, because they're not being taught how to do that. So, I would say I first heard about knife crime when I was 10 years old, and that was when I was applying to secondary school, and a young man named Kyan Prince was stabbed outside the school that I went on to attend. At that age, he was 15, and I thought, you know, wow, I couldn't really appreciate the tender age that he had, because I was only 10, and to me 15 seemed like quite old. When I got to 15, I thought, if I was killed today, I have not done nothing with my life, and he was so young. How could he have been taken away from us in this cruel and, you know, extremely violent way? It was also when I was 15 that, again, somebody that was close to me that I actually knew this time, my childhood friend and my next door neighbor, Marvin Henry, he was shot and killed a month before his 18th birthday. And again, when I got to 17, a month before my 18th birthday, I thought, wow, Marvin was really, really young when this happened to him. Why am I bringing this up? I don't need to relay to you the figures. I could just ask, who knows someone who's been killed as a result of knife or gun crime? In this audience, who knows somebody? Who knows somebody who's in prison for committing an act of knife or gun crime? Okay. So we cannot really ignore the disproportionate effects that these crimes have on our particular community. I feel like people shy away from this because, you know, from the oppressors, it's used to justify, you know, their racism, because black people are just inherently more violent and all of that rubbish that we don't believe, but it leads us not to speak about what's really going on. Black people are not inherently more violent, but traumatized people are violent. That's the distinction that has to be made. And it is true that we cannot become complacent when holding the police to account for their racial stereotyping, but I'm so sick and tired of us ignoring the fact that we have internalized white people's supremacist ideas and their view of our young black children, and we have internalized that to the point that our young black boys are more scared of each other than anybody else. They perceive each other as a threat, and that is why the violence is happening in our community, because we've internalized that. And so I set up Get Out of the Gang when I was 16. We now provide 5 key services. I won't go into all the depths of the methods that we're using to tackle the violence, because if you're interested in that, you will come and speak to me at the end and find out exactly what we are doing. But we need help. That's the first thing. I believe that, as I said at the beginning, young people need to be leading these initiatives. That doesn't mean that there's not a place for our elders. There is, and I'm going to come on to that. All the elders in the room, you're going to get it from me, because I feel like I had to find my way on my own, and that should not have been the case. That's what I want to make clear. Another major problem in our community is egos. They've been mentioned on the panel a few times already. This kind of hero and savior complex that is very white supremacist in nature has been further internalized by our own people. We want to be the individual to eradicate violence in our community. We want to be the individual to bring economic stability to our community. It doesn't work that way. Those egos take up too much space, energy and effort, which could be much better placed actually tackling the issues at hand than promoting people's own egos and agendas. I've heard some in the room today, I'll not name any names. What's important is when we move forward today, we have to understand that egos have no place, especially in this movement. That is a teaching of pan-africanism, unity, but with those egos, we cannot achieve that. So the egos need to go. You know, when I first set up Get Out the Gang, I had also taken from examples of my elders, and I thought I was going to be the one. I was going to be the one to change the violence in my community. Now, I'm so glad that I was allowed to get rid of that ego much before I was, you know, to progress into further adulthood, because I'm only 19. But now my goal and objective is to tackle this violence as the primary issue, because we cannot achieve any other type of unity if our people are killing each other. It's just not going to happen. And so I don't really care how we reach those goals. I'm trying to use as many platforms and forums to have that impact and to challenge and tackle that violence, because that is the essential thing. So if you were to read the programme, you would have also seen that I've had quite a lot of involvement with the Justice for Mark Duggan campaign in London. And when we were doing that campaign, we realised that we kind of had to separate the legal campaign for justice from the state with the other issues that were coming to light about the people in Haringey and how they live and all the other ways that they are oppressed, which is obviously, you know, deaths in police custody fitted into that because, you know, Tottenham in particular has had a lot of deaths by police. So it wasn't really going to help us, though, that legal campaign tackling those kind of social issues. So Mark Duggan's good friends, who are now kind of in their early 30s, they've come forward, and because I've been working with them through the campaign, we're going to set up a charity. When I say we, I'm taking a backseat, I'm going to advise, given the kind of experiences that I've had setting up my organisation, and I'm going to become a trustee and sit at the back and just help to guide them, because I believe in localism. I believe that these young people in their environments, if they do not see you and know you and you're not part of their everyday reality, why are they going to listen to you? They're not. The best methods are when we live and work in our same community. But I feel like the reason we're not having as much impact doing that is because we haven't dealt with this trauma, because it can become very draining and traumatic to live and work in the same community. But we take that over letting external people come in, tell us how we need to do it, and try and do it for us, because the young people are not going to listen to them. So it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, and the young people feel further marginalised and frustrated because every type of intervention they have with somebody external does not work. And that makes it much more difficult when we go in from the community and try and have that impact that we want to actually have it, because they're very sceptical. They've had a lot of people come to them telling them they're going to offer them these things and change their lives and change their experiences, but they haven't been able to deliver. There's a very good reason for that. I personally am very sick and tired of chasing for funding. I'm not doing it anymore. No, but we can't do it because we know that it's not in their interest for this issue to end. They don't care if our children are killed and gunned down on the streets. They might show a little bit of care when it spills over into their communities. I remember in 2008 in London, 28 young people, that's only under 18s, were stabbed or shot in 1 year. Out of those 28, 3 of them were white, and the Sun newspaper said, you know, knife crime, with the 3 faces of the white people, because that's when it matters to them, when it crosses over. But when it doesn't, we're going to be left to our own devices. We are told that we can apply for this pot of money and this pot of money and this pot of money. This does not happen overnight. And as long as we look at it for what it really is, which is the trauma, and dealing with that, and dealing with the mindset, I don't like using the term gang, and I'm going to come on to why I think that's really wrong. And it's kind of, it's funny because my organisation's called Get Out of the Gang. I was 16 when I set that up, and thankfully I'm not as naive as when I first did that, but now it's a brand, and so we roll with it. But in the near future, we will be changing that to practice what we preach, because I do not agree with the terminology. And so, this idea of localism, we have to think global and act local. That means we have to have a global strategy that we implement locally. If we are not in tune with what's happening all over the world, because this issue of violence is not just one, you know, people will love to say, oh, but it's different in London to Manchester, you know. Yes, there are small things that are different depending on exactly the location, and that's where the localism comes in. But in order to have the, you know, overarchingly, the violence is based on the trauma, and so that needs to be addressed. Wherever in the world, black people, young black boys and girls are killing each other, that needs to be addressed as first and foremost, right? And so I think the broader issue is that for a long time we have relied on the state to provide us the money to do this. I just want to let you think about this. I mean, in the UK, we have, in London alone, the Met, we have their Trident task force. I know every borough council has a gangs team and a sub-gangs division and a task force and all the bureaucracy. I won't even name all the organisations because it doesn't really matter. So many people's wages depend on our young boys killing each other that they are not going to let that go. Furthermore, Furthermore, that's only at a small scale, right? The broader picture is that we have seen a direct continuation from slavery because our young black boys are still commodities. They are, because of what has already been mentioned, the prison industrial complex means that, yes, it is more profitable for them to be in prison, but I would say, you know, it's funny because I study law, and in my human rights class a few weeks ago, you know, it was the introductory session to this human rights civil liberties course I'm taking in law. And so the teacher said, you know, you rarely get an opportunity to look at, you know, the human rights articles in their full form and just question, like, why are they like that? Is anything missing? Rare. So Article number 3, which is against slavery and forced servitude and labour, it says that, you know, there's exceptions. It's not an absolute right. And it can be justified if it's, you know, if you're subject to correctional facilities, if that's the punishment that's been accorded to you. Good and well over there alone, but when you mix private business with a state complex that's supposed to be a prison system, it's no longer about punishment, it's about economics. And racism has always been economic. Slavery was economic. The private prison industry today is economic. And that's why it puts us in a difficult position, because we know that there has to be consequences for our actions, but how can we sell our young people to you? Because that's what we're doing if we snake on them and tell them and put them in prison. The other effects of that means we as a black community are not trying to talk to the police about what's happening. We want to resolve it in our own community. Because we don't have the structures and things in place to actually do that, that's why the violence is further perpetuated, because now the young people have internalized that if they want to deal with the violence, they're not going to the police. There's codes, you know, on the street, there's rules and laws, and snitching is not one of them. And so we're going to deal with it ourselves. That is why the violence has perpetuated so much, because this system has to change. But how can it change if the police and the prison system continue to operate in the way they do? You know, these are things we need to think practically about. It's all good putting it out there, I'm just saying it, but I don't have the solution to that. That's something we definitely need to think about. Again, with the trauma, mental health is a real taboo in our community. It really is. And it's part of what I just said before about how we've been told that we're strong as a people because we've endured so much, and therefore, why are you going to somebody else to sort out your problems, please? That's what some families will say if somebody, you know, is experiencing things. Mental health is out of your control. Mental health is developed, you know, let me not go into it because I'm not a professional, but from my personal experience, I know that it's childhood trauma that develops certain mental health issues in your early adulthood. And so, well, first of all, let me just say, with the cuts and everything, the mental health institutions in this country are not fit for purpose. And I know why it's a taboo in our community, because the black community does not have a good relationship with the Mental Health Institute. It was another way that we have been oppressed over the years, correct? So what are we going to do then? Because the mental health doesn't go away, but we don't have that institution to rely on. You know, the institution is not even equipped to deal with an individual's mental health. So how can we deal with community mental health, community trauma, intergenerational trauma, these things that have developed when a lot of people who are suffering from the same things in their own personal lives live in one community and have to take the energy, the traumatic energy from each other and try and share that burden, but it becomes very, very overwhelming. And so as a youth worker, I never feel comfortable signposting any of my young people to the NHS or mental health services because they're not fit for purpose. But then what are we going to do about it? I'm going to come back to economics because I think this is in tune with the funding and everything else. As a young person, you know, Viv and Lee touched very heavily on a lot of the things I wanted to talk about today, but I feel like as a young person, you need to hear it from my mouth representing the young people. If we had our institutions and our economic stability, we would not have to rely on the NHS to sort out our mental health issues and our trauma, because we would be able to privately fund that. I mean, in America, there's more of a culture of kind of therapists and stuff than we see really in the UK. But if we are not able to fund that ourselves and to do it in our own way, because we already know that we can't rely on the institutions that are going to be, you know, they're institutionally racist. So we need private therapists, you know, cognitive behavioral therapists and all the rest of it to really deal with what's going on. But that costs a lot of money. No, yeah, you're exactly right, because it has to address our culture and our unique position. I take that, very correct. But we don't, where's the money to pay for that? And I feel like a lot of the time we come to these kind of things and we know, yeah, we need to create more economic stability and have our own economic stability as a people. But I don't know how many events I've been to and I've heard that, but where is the communal pot? I don't see one, and after every single event, I have never seen one being put in place, but after this event, I think it would be a good resolution if one is. As Lee said earlier, when he was growing up, he had access to that pot. We pay our dues, we pay a small amount. I don't want to hear, oh, but we're all struggling. Exactly, we are all struggling, which means it's going to be more effective if we put in our little bit of change per week, and then we can access that when we need to. And so, as I said, this is going to be a long process, and I've only ever received funding to do very, very short-term work. And then they pit you against each other, and they'll be like, oh, well, you know, we don't have enough money for you to do, why can't you just do it for 6 months? Because how am I going to address 400 years of trauma in 6 months? I'm not going to be able to do that. It's just foolish. But then we have to know why they want that, because as I said before, it's not in their interest for this to ever finish. Now, further to that, I think the media need to address that. The media uses language, and I feel like because we're reliant on the state's money, we accept their language, we accept their terminology, and this is what I was saying about the term gang. We accept the notion of gangs, this idea of gangs, which is very racialized, because we want their money. And when their money and their funding criteria says you need to tackle gangs, we're going to use the term gangs. And now, I don't know if anybody's noticed, but if you're from the sector and you know if you apply for funding, you'll notice that there's been a very quick shift to now use the overarching term of radicalization and to tackle gangs and extremism all under one banner. We can see very clearly what they're doing with that. Just be very mindful of that. I don't think it's actually safe or in our best interest to continue relying on these sources of funding, but we will have to do that until we have our own pots of money, because otherwise the work will just not get done at all, and it's too important not to do, which means right now, we need to set up that economic institution. There's no time to wait. We need our own banks. We need our own economic, so we can divest that to where it needs to go, the organizations where it's in our interests. And the media, further to that, I mean, who went on the reparations march this year? Anyone go? Who saw it on the news? Oh, you saw it on the news? What news reported it? I'd love to know. No, yeah, okay, that's what I thought. No, I didn't think you saw it on the news because I didn't think it was on the news. My point is that we continue relying on their media platforms when we know that they don't promote us in a good light. We know that they don't promote our things when we are coming together. The Million Man March wasn't on there. Of course it wasn't going to be on there. When would they put hundreds of thousands of black people coming together and not acting violent? That's not in their interests. But we have to understand that it's not just about us condoning their media, it's what happens with that. Because research conducted by Cardiff University showed that over 70% of stories that are about young black men are about crime. 70%. That is obviously higher than their, first of all, let me say, for males in general, it was higher. But between the disproportionality between the white males and the black males, 70%, 40% of overall stories. And so, how can we expect our young black men not to internalize that when the only thing they see is that in the media and we do not do anything to challenge it? We don't do anything to challenge it. We know the media's not in our interests. It's time to create our own. I'm so glad that Nubian Times is here, but it's more about supporting those groups when we know there are, show that there's demand for them, stop buying other kind of media outlets because they're not promoting our issues. And further to that, let me come on to music. It was mentioned briefly, but I really want to go into this in quite some depth because recently I watched a TED Talk. Off the top of my head, I really can't remember who it was by, but it was about the fact that black murder is acceptable. Yes, it is, because you would never turn on a radio station and hear any music about Turkish people killing each other or about Asian people killing each other. But when we turn on the radio station and we hear black people killing each other, that's normal. And when we promote that lifestyle, of course, our young people are going to internalize it. People say, oh, but our creative arts and hip hop, and we come through and we use our music. If you make music that promotes black people harming one another, I am not going to support it. I will not buy it. I will not watch it. But you guys all have to make that same commitment. And you have to tell the young people why they can't be listening to music that in every other sentence uses the N-word and why they think that they can now, it's appropriation and it's a term of endearment. No, it is not. But I personally, it was only a few years ago I made the conscious decision to stop using that term. And I feel like young people don't really understand that, but there needs to be more from our elders helping us to understand why we can never use that word in any positive light. There's nothing positive about that word. It is not a term of endearment. And actually, we don't own the music industry. No, we do not. And so we know there's an agenda there, because if our young people want to make it in the music industry, they are forced to make this type of music, because that's the music that sells. That's what they are told. So how come, you know, because we don't buy conscious music, because that's not in the mainstream, young people are never going to make that type of music. Young people will continue listening to this harmful music, which I know is damaging to the psyche. You know, when I was 17 and I just set up Get Out the Gang, I remember being in sixth form and Chief Keef's song had just come out. He was a bit younger than me, actually, even more funnily. And I won't even say any of the lyrics of that song, but if you know Chief Keef, you'll know that there's only a certain type of thing he could be talking about. And I remember going into one of my teacher's offices and being, I'm so excited, I'm going to see Chief Keef at the O2. And he just sat me down and said, why? Why are you excited about that? That's surely very hypocritical given the work that you're doing. And I said, oh, no, but we can separate that out. You know, that's just music. This is real life. He said, but you stand against violence against your young people. So why would you listen to somebody talking about committing acts of violence against your young people? Why would you do that? And this was an Asian man, actually, and I was quite upset that actually didn't come from one of the elders in my own community, because we need to be talking about that more. When your young child says that, no, we want to listen to this music for a certain reason, tell them no. But don't just tell it to them in that way. Sit them down and explain why it's not in their interest, it's not in our community's interest to keep promoting and supporting and buying into that kind of lifestyle that is promoted and we're told is the only one that we can have. Lastly, because I know we're running short on time, I just want to talk a little bit about identity, because again, that's really, really key, especially in the issue of violence and why it continues to be perpetuated. What systems are in place to build our understanding and our self-worth? I'd just like to say, my dad's actually from Zambia, and so I think it's very fitting that this, you know, Zambian, I'm really liking that. But I wouldn't have always, and this is a real issue that I want to talk about. I think contrasting to America, the idea of being mixed race is much more common in the UK. And we have to embrace that, because otherwise there are a lot of young people that are going to miss out. I felt like actually politically I had no other choice but to identify with black, because I'm perceived as being black, which means I'm going to be oppressed as a black person, which means I am black. But do you not think that's a bit challenging for me then in my personal life to completely ignore one side of my identity? Because my mum is white, my mum is from Cyprus and Scotland, my dad is from Zambia and Malawi. Unfortunately, I don't know anything about any of my cultures. Actually, I went to the African Liberation Day, Pan-African kind of meeting in London a while ago, and they asked this question, they got everyone to stand up, and then they said, sit down if you feel African, and everybody sat down. They told everyone to stand up again, and they said, sit down if you feel, no, so they said, stay standing if you feel British, and everybody sat down, apart from me and one other person. In my personal life, do I really feel British? No, I feel excluded by that system just as much as you all do. But how could I feel anything other? I've never been outside to any of the countries I'm supposed to be from. I don't speak any of the languages. I don't have any access to the black side of my family because my dad, as I said, was very violent to my mum and we had to completely move away from him. And then it was his choice not to speak to me for a further 10 years. I haven't seen him since I was 11. And so who was going to teach me about this black identity that I have to hold, but I don't know anything about it? I don't know anything about my roots. When I first started secondary school, let me make it clear, I love this lady over here because she stood up and she said, my name is, sorry, I can't actually remember what it is. But she made a point, and some people were a bit, after she said that. She said, I tell them to call me VJ because it's easier. And through growing up, I mean, Temi is not a European name, it's a Nigerian name, but I'm not actually from Nigeria. It was a nickname that was given to me by my auntie, my white auntie, even more strange at that. So we have to, you know. But when I was, my full name is actually Temwani Malida Mwale. And when I was growing up, I used to cuss out my mum. Why would you let my dad name me? I've got such an embarrassing name. I hated it. I really hated it. And when I started secondary school, and you know, none of the teachers know you and they have to read it off the register, people could see me. I felt so much shame that my name had to be this. And it was so, you know, people would laugh about it. And when they realized it was something that I felt, you know, a way about, they would call it to me so that I would feel embarrassed and feel upset. Luckily, I don't feel that way anymore, but that was through personal development. That's because somewhere along the way, I found my way and found my identity. I'm not all the way there yet now, but I'm further along that process. But somebody should have been there to tell me, actually, you know, some people drop out their last name because they don't want the colonial name that they've been given. You should be thankful that you didn't have to have one of those and that you actually have a name that's true to some of your roots. At all of these kind of events, I hear a lot that, you know, this saying, this African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. Where is that village, may I ask? Where is it? When will it stop being rhetoric and start being actually implemented? When will we treat other people's children like we treat our own and start that communal way of living and village life whereby if we see someone else's child doing something wrong, we're going to take them in and educate them because there's a reason for what they're doing. They might not understand it, but we need to school them. Without having access to the black side of my family, I discovered Pan-Africanism on my own. And the reason why I wanted a show of hands at the young people who had heard about it before is that I was really interested to find out if they'd been taught by somebody. I wish I'd been taught by somebody. This is something I should have been taught growing up. And my question is, given that we have so many displaced people and so many mixed race people in this country that might not have access to their black roots, who is going to teach them what they need to know to grow up? My white mother could not teach me what it's going to be like to be a black woman, but God, she tried. She did. I give her that. She's the best mum I could have ever asked for, but she couldn't be expected to know those things. So then you have to take it upon yourselves to find those children where they are and speak to their parents. Ask them if you can do a kind of communal little education club before we get our proper institutions, because I'm not saying that's a substitute. We need our own schools. But before we have implemented them, because we don't have time to wait, if you go back to your community tomorrow and you see a few, mixed race children and maybe you're aware that the black side of their family isn't around, what are you going to do to bring them into your family? Because they deserve to have family, they deserve the right to know about their history and their roots, and they deserve to be taught it and not have to find it on their own. And so... as I said, the name of this talk was Youth at the Forefront. But how can we be at the forefront without guidance? We need our wisdom, we need our counsel that comes from our elders. We need to be able to call on you, as Lee said, in times when we need advice. But we also have a lot of passion and energy that some of you older people who might be a little bit burnt out do not have. You cannot continue holding on to a baton that you don't have all the energy to take forward. We have the energy, we have the passion, we need the wisdom, we need the knowledge, and it's your duty to give that to us so we can take this baton forward.
Manchester, England, make some noise! Let me first say thank you to the committee that put on this 70th anniversary commemoration of the 1945 5th Pan-African Congress that took place here in Manchester. I'm humbled by the invitation, and I'm humbled that they thought enough of me to bring me here and give me a few minutes to make some remarks. Just 2 months ago, I took a group of Africans from America, American Africans, Americanized Africans. We were at Ghana, and we visited Kwame Nkrumah's shrine, and we visited the W.E.B. Du Bois Center. In studying the history of Pan-Africanism, you're going to study the history of a great movement, but you're also going to study the history of a movement that still has some unfinished business and some unreconciled ideological strivings. Within the Pan-Africanist movement, I represent the Garveyite wing of that movement. And I will speak to you as a revolutionary Pan-African nationalist because that's what Garveyites are. We are not integrationists, we are not multiculturalists, and we are not accommodationists. This is important and it must be stated. When you deal with Garveyism, to be clear, you're dealing with a movement that puts the needs of African people first. We are our #1 priority. We do not, and this is the protocol of the Garvey movement yesterday. It was the protocol of the Garvey movement when I was its Minister of Education. We do not form permanent alliances with any organization, and definitely not any other race or culture. And the reason it is in the policy of the Garvey movement not to establish permanent alliances is no other race of people has ever proven to be as interested in the African as the African is interested in herself. This has to be stated because in the historiography of Pan-Africanism, I've noticed over the past decade, it has been moving away from a race-first, unapologetically African position to one of Obamaism type of loving everyone on earth as much as we love ourselves. That's not Garvey. We respect every race. We hate no one, but we are our own priority. And we are unapologetic in saying that we are for the African thing only. Wishing other groups and movements goodwill does not take away from us being for the African thing. It's okay to wish goodwill to other people, but we must not be confused that when white folk or non-Africans attended the Marcus Garvey conventions, they attended them as guests, not members. There is no non-African membership in a pan-African organization. If there's non-Africans in it, then it's not a pan-African organization. Which takes us to another controversial tenet of Garveyism, and that is the refusal to accept non-African funding. One of the biggest contradictions of so-called Garveyites and Pan-Africanists here, there, and everywhere is claiming to be against white supremacy while you're being funded by white supremacy. The hand that pays is the hand that rules. You cannot be a Pan-African movement being funded by the government of Britain. You cannot be. It is a contradiction in ideology. The revolution will not be financed by your oppressor. It never was and it never will be, and we need to be clear about that. The mixed race African issue. What is the Garveyite position on that? The Garveyite position on the mixed race African is that there's no such thing as a mixed race African. The Garveyite perspective is that if you are of an African parent, if you are of African parentage, then you are an African child. We don't play the schisms and the isms. We don't do biraciality, multiraciality. Why don't we do that? Because during enslavement, there was no such thing as a biracial African. During enslavement, there was no such thing as a multiracial African. You were considered an N-word with the rest of us. There was no difference. Now, when they divided you out, they may have used mulatto as a grouping mechanism, but when it came to valuing the life, the so-called biracial African person's life was no more valuable than someone who was 100% full-blooded African. So why are we playing these games now? But we would argue, though, that for those who are of mixed racial ancestry, you must identify wholeheartedly with your Africanity, which does not dismiss the fact that your mother or father may be white. On the personal level, that's your ancestry. You got to get to know it. You got to get to understand it. But on the realm of politics, you must recognize that the world sees you as an African and nothing else. And I agree with the queen who spoke just before me. She's right. We have to be more inviting of so-called mixed race Africans into revolutionary circle. Because if we don't bring them into us, the enemy will recruit them into his army. And we have President Obama to be shown as the best example of what can be done with a mixed race African. We believe in independence. Pan-Africanists in general, Garveyites in particular, independence of government. We may run people for office, but we don't endorse parties. That's not Pan-Africanism. Because that party structure is a Eurocentric reality created to protect European imperialism. So why would you endorse it? It's okay to run somebody for office as a strategy, but don't let mainstream European electoral politics become your way of life. Remember, our goal as Pan-Africanists is not to get a black president. It's not to get a black governor. It's not for a black parliamentarian in a white system. It's to build our own governmental system for our people. We seek our own, not participation in someone else's. But I saw a lot of backslide in these past 7 years. I saw a lot of Pan-Africanists get fooled by the President Obama illusion. Oh, yes. Die-hard Pan-Africanists, people who never question red, black, and green. I saw them taking a second look at the red, black, and green and saying, well, maybe Obama is symbolizing a transformation away from totalitarian Europeanism to multiculturalism. How wrong they were. And their ignorance stemmed from the fact that they did not understand white supremacy. Because when you understand white supremacy, you recognize that the tactics may change. The strategies may be replaced. The particular behaviors may undergo some modification. But the purpose and principle of white supremacy is consistent. And for those of you who fell for the Obama shenanigan, it was because you didn't understand white supremacy. White supremacy is about white control, power, and authority. And if it is in the best interest of white supremacy to put a black face in place to protect white power, that's what it will do. And many of you fell for that strategy. 7 years before he was elected, I called it. I said, by the time this man leaves office, I said it at the African American Museum in Philadelphia, by the time this man leaves office, black folk, not just in America, but around the world, will be in a situation that is almost as worse as slavery. The anointing of Obama was not the signaling of a transformation. It was a time out for racism to regather itself, refuel itself, and in 2016, they're going to come out the gates rumbling. And we got to be prepared for it. Well, why are we not multiculturalists? We're not multiculturalists because we don't recognize any other culture to be equal to ours because we are the creator of every other culture. And if you know your history, where did multiculturalism get its impetus? First of all, it's a European brain product. And a lot of us are identifying with a lot of European brain products. Multiculturalism was invented at the turn of the century as an attack on African-centered education and approaches to historiography. So how can you be a Pan-Africanist and be a multiculturalist when multiculturalism was invented to kill the African-centered approach to world history? These are the contradictions we have to look at. This is why you have to study any ideological position you think you belong to. Know the history before you claim to be an adherent. Know the history before you claim to be an adherent. In the Garvey movement, we don't believe in mixed race. We don't believe that black men should be with anything other than a black woman. In Garvey's life, you cannot join the UNIA if your wife didn't look like your mother. Why are we changing up now? I'll give you something else that's controversial. Homosexuality and lesbianism. In Garvey's day, you could not be a member if you were sexually confused. But I know Garveyites today back off from that. You want to hide that. See, we want to pick and choose the principles of Garveyism that we want to espouse. We don't want to lay them all out there. That doesn't mean we hate our homosexual brothers and sisters. I don't. I disagree with the lifestyle because it's anti-African. I disagree with the lifestyle because I know it's being funded by the World Bank, the IMF, to depopulate African people. I know our homosexual and lesbian brothers and sisters don't know how they're being used for something larger. They was never at no World Bank meeting. They don't belong to the Bilderbergs. But just because you was not at the meeting don't mean you're not a pawn in the game. And we got to recognize that. We believe in African family. Our whole universe is based on what? The balance of masculine and feminine energy. That is African reality. Masculine and feminine. Every atom in existence has a positive charge and a negative. What happens when you put two positives together? What happens when you put two negatives together? You destroy it. The Garveyite is unapologetic in his Africanity. But we need to be careful about something, and that is being armchair Pan-Africanist. There's this new thing that says you could be a Pan-Africanist and have no connection to Africa. How in the hell can that be? In fact, in America, we got a phrase for it. It says if you can't go to Africa in physical form, go in your mind. But you don't go to the Korean hair store for weave in your mind. You go for real. You don't go to Nike and Adidas in your mind. You go for real and you spend money in those stores. So how is it we can go to the Arab-owned business for real with money, and we can go to the Jewish-owned business for real with money, and we can go to the car lot and the clothing store and the weave shop with real money on our feet, real walking. But when it comes to connecting with Africa, we're going to go and dream about going as if you can afford to get there. Pan-Africanism is connection. And we have to recognize two significant contradictions of the Pan-African movement. Even Mr. Garvey fell a little short here. Number one, most great Pan-Africanists in history. Because remember, Pan-Africanism came to Africa, it was not started there. Nor was it started with Henry Sylvester Williams. The grandfathers of Pan-Africanism were from the States. John Brown Rushworm, the great Jamaican who came to America by way of Jamaica, the first black man to earn a college degree, the first black man to publish a newspaper in America, Jamaican-born John Brown Rushworm, a great Pan-Africanist before Garvey, but even in Jamaica they don't know his name. Bishop Henry McNeil Turner from Georgia, who taught the Honorable Elijah Muhammad as a child that God was black. That's where Mr. Muhammad got it. That's where Marcus Garvey got it. He lived before Garvey. Martin Delaney from Pennsylvania, the one who invented the phrase Africa for the Africans. Garvey took it and added those at home and those abroad. The reason Garvey succeeded in America is because the Pan-African groundwork had been laid. Alexander Crummell, W.E.B. Du Bois' first teacher on Pan-Africanism, who spent 20 years in West Africa, the longest sojourn of an American-born Pan-Africanist. So the groundwork was laid. That's why Garvey survived in America where he couldn't do it in Jamaica. Because in America, you either black or white. You mix race, that's black. But in the Caribbean, y'all have a more sophisticated color hierarchy. You have octoroons and quadroons and aliens and all kind of stuff. But in America, it's one or the other. So it was easy to accept a program of race first in America, whereas in the Caribbean, it would be more difficult because being a shade lighter meant you get a better job. Being a shade lighter means you might get accepted to college. So it was a lot different there. That's why it struggled there, but it found fertile ground in America. Pan-Africanism means oneness. Oneness with all Africans. When you say you Pan-Africanist, you're saying I'm placing my membership in the African family first. And that is more important than being a Muslim. It's more important than being a Christian. It's more important than being a Mason. It's more important than being an Igbo or Yoruba or a Hausa or Zulu or Xhosa. I'm African first. That's Pan-Africanism, which is another contradiction because some of y'all in here, let's be honest, in the States, you more linked up with your cultural tribal identity than you are with your African identity. Let's call it what it is. Some of you more Jamaican than you African. Let's call it what it is. Some of us more black American than we African. Let's call it what it is. Some of you identify more with a slave ship put you down at and not where it picked you up at. Let's call it what it is. The pan-Africanist is a statesman and a stateswoman of African affairs. We're different from everyone else. They still family, but we don't see the world through the same eyes as the Hebrew or the Nation of Islam or the Gazan Earths or the Nawapians, all of whom we respect, but we do it a little bit differently because we're dealing with family on the global level. So we don't just deal with what's going on with blacks in Britain. We don't just deal with what's going on with blacks in the Caribbean. We don't just deal with what's going on with blacks in the continent. We step back, look at the whole chessboard, and we plot and strategize and say, based on what's going on all 7 continents, this is what we should be doing. And some people who don't understand politics will say, well, aren't you Pan-Africanists creating such a big thing that you'll never be able to get anything done? Don't you need to chomp it down into chunks? Yes, with the implementation of the program, but no with the ideology and vision. Because if you are a Pan-Africanist, you believe something, and that is that fundamental to the improvement for African life is a collective approach to the solutions that must involve all Africans everywhere at the same time. If you Pan-Africanists, you believe Black UK does not fix up problems until Black Africa does. If you Pan-Africanists, you believe that Black Canada, Black America, Black Caribbean cannot rise without the mothership of Africa herself. If you Pan-Africanists, you believe that the respect we get around the world is a direct reflection of the disrespect shown to our mother continent. Why are Chinese respected in the UK? Chinese are respected in the US, the UK, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Canada, wherever they go. Same thing with the Arab, wherever they go. Same thing with the East Indian, wherever they go. Why is it they are respected no matter where they live? Not just in some places, but everywhere. Because they have a mother country that demands respect. They have a mother country that will not allow any of its natives to be disrespected by a foreign government. We're doing this whole thing wrong. Even Dr. King had to look at it towards the end of the civil rights movement and say that in order for us to fix this black thing, we're going to have to play a hand in that African thing. So when we say Pan-Africanist, we're looking at the grand chessboard. You got to realize something about Garvey. He's the only leader you had since slavery. The only one who led globally. Everyone else was regional. They were great men, but they might have led something in the UK. They might have led something in the US. They might have led something in Africa. They might have led something in the Caribbean. But His Excellency Marcus Messiah Garvey, the elected provisional president of Africa, was leader of black people all over the world at the same time. As I prepare to wrap, another contradiction. From John Brown all the way down to Garvey. And Brother Beanie Elder talked about it early. And that is our rejection of African ancestral veneration. One of the shortcomings of Pan-Africanism, study them all. Very few Pan-Africanists, including those from Africa, venerated their ancestors. And I'm saying here and now that that's one thing that we got to fix. We got to make that right, because in order for us to win this war against white supremacy, we're going to need every soldier we can have, the ones we can see and the ones we can't see. Brothers and sisters, Pan-Africanism is about being proud to be African, not just knowing your history. I know a lot of sellouts who know their damn history. You know how many scholars we got in America who knows history inside and out but has no race pride? Knowing your history doesn't impress me. There's white historians with PhDs in African studies. That's intellect. Pride is a spiritual electrification of the intellectual information. Brothers and sisters, education. I'm going to round it out here because I'm an educator and I'm a psychologist. The Queen was absolutely correct. We are a traumatized people. And you know what's so unique about the trauma of the African? The reason it's so difficult for us to heal from our trauma is because the source of the trauma has not stopped. So we're looking for healing while we're being traumatized. What woman being violated by a man, God forbid, what woman being violated by a man can begin to heal while the man is still inflicting the abuse? The timeout hasn't come yet. And we need the timeout to come. That's where the hate comes from. The pain, the anguish, the reason we have so much violence in the community is due to three primary causes. Number one, miseducation. We haven't been properly prepared for life. That includes properly prepared to understand white supremacy and to navigate it. So for those of you who are educators of African children, homeschool or real school, if you're not teaching them about white supremacy, what it is, how it operates, and how to navigate it, you're miseducating those children. So miseducation. Two, economic castration. The black man can't get no work. The black man can't get no job. After the civil rights movement, the white man came up with a new strategy. They said since black folks want to go to college so bad, since black folks want to wear a shirt and tie to work so bad, this is what we going to do. Because at the end of the civil rights movement, black men were tired of working with their hands. Black women were tired of scrubbing floors and washing clothes. They said, I want to do something that uses my head more than my hands. So the white man said, let's accommodate that. We're going to give them degrees and send them to college. We're going to make everybody qualifiable for a student loan to go get an education. Have you ever wondered why you can go into a bank here in the UK and ask for a loan to start your business and you get denied? But if you ask for a loan for college, you get approved? Have you ever wondered why you go into the bank and ask for a loan to build an industry, you get denied? But if you ask for a loan to buy a car, you get approved? Why is it I can't get a loan for business, but you approve me for a student loan that's worth more than the business loan I was asking for? You approve me for a car loan that's worth more than the business loan I was asking for. It's because if they invest in your education or invest in your transportation, they investing in themselves. Because the interest rate on that student loan and the car note interest rate is going to have you indebted to the bankers for the next 10 to 20 years. They're not going to give you money to separate from the system. They're only going to give you money to become more dependent upon it, which is why when Marcus, just before he made his transition, Mr. Garvey was plotting an international pan-African bank. Why was he doing that? Because he said, I could put the ships on the water, but when we make money with the Black Star Line, we got to put the money in white banks. So even if everyone in this room has your own business right now in Manchester, we are Black Wall Street, we booming, we got supermarkets and hospitals, gas stations and distribution networks. What do you do with the profit from your business? You put it in Morgan Stanley, Chase Manhattan, these European-owned banks. So even though it looked like you're the captain of your destiny, you're not, because the white man is able to float loans off of your black money. That's right. Under the laws of banking, you can loan $100 for every dollar deposited. So if you got $1 billion black dollars deposited times 100, our money's still working for the enemy more than it's working for us. So to talk about a black business without a black bank to capture the capital, you only dealing with half the story. We need black banks and we need black schools. How can you call yourself a revolutionary when the mind of your child is being exploited by the oppressor? How can you call yourself a revolutionary when your child go to school and learns the songs and the pledges of Britain, gets totally Europeanized? And then when they graduate from high school, you want to get mad at them for acting white when you're the one who subjected it to them in the first place. No white money, no white participation, no white romance. That's Garveyism. I'm giving it to you. That's Garveyism. I know some of y'all done fell for the multicultural movement. Loving other people as much as you love your own. That's crazy. Find me a European Jew who loves a German as much as himself. Find me one. Nobody does. I didn't say hate nobody. No, that's not African. We don't hate, but we do understand. Don't hate them. Respect them. They just need to understand why we got to do this ourselves. You know why? Because when a white person comes into a solution meeting for black folk, even if they well-meaning, black people, because of the white Jesus complex, we will automatically start looking to the white person without even recognizing it to deliver us from evil, because we've been taught that they are the greatest. So when they come amongst you, your Willie Lynch chip is automatically activated the minute they walk in the room. So in conclusion, we got something new we're doing in the States right now. My organization is Team Pan-African, and we have a research and repatriation task force where we're looking for brothers and sisters around the world who are interested in investigating a particular African nation for repatriation feasibility. We have folks on Team Somalia, Team Ghana, Team Nigeria, Team Ethiopia, Team Kenya, Team Malawi, Team Congo, Team Zambia. What is the job of each team? Investigate the economics, investigate the stability of government, because we don't want to send Africans back home to a government that is in turmoil, where they can get caught up in somebody else's civil war. We got to investigate the family structure, the minerals, the resources. What businesses would be most likely to thrive in Nigeria? Because the ones that may work in Nigeria may not work in Ethiopia. Africa is a very diverse continent. Not every country is ready to receive you. And so if you're interested in being a part of that, please get in contact with me. The other thing I want to say is this. Repatriation has been something pushed to the side by Pan-Africanists. We love Africa, but we don't like going. We love Africa, but we don't like moving over there. We hate white supremacy, but we would rather fight the white man in the UK than help build with our brothers and sisters back home. It is a contradiction. I'll be in South Africa next week for a 3-week tour. Cape Town, Pretoria, Zululand, Durban. Can't wait to go. Haven't been since '09. They invited me there, and every time I go to Africa, I don't care what country it is, the question is the same. If y'all love Africa so much, why don't y'all ever come to invest here? Let me explain something to y'all. African countries are well within their right not to trust us, because we have not proven that we can be consistent with any damn thing we do. They should be skeptical of you, because you have been under the white man so long. They have to make sure that they form an alliance with an authentic African and not a falsified European. You know what happened in Liberia when we went back. You know what happened in Sierra Leone when we went back. We became the oppressors against our own brother and sister because we were operating with a Eurocentric mentality. Marcus Garvey never said that every African should go back home. He never said that. There was no such thing called a Back to Africa movement. Never. The media called it that. Mr. Garvey said only those who can be of use, which is only 20% of you in here. You're not going to Africa with your perm, your weave, you a man with a boyfriend, girl with a girlfriend. Africa don't need that. You go with basketballs and video games and tweeting. Africa don't need that. You cause more problems than you solve over there. As far as I'm concerned, anybody want to get repatriated, they got to go through an interview and a training process. In conclusion, I want to let you guys know tomorrow night at 5 o'clock at the West Indian Center here in Manchester, I will be giving an address to you all on the state of Black America, bringing you up to date on what's going on with your brothers and sisters in America. What does Dr. Umar Johnson think about Minister Farrakhan's march last weekend? Bring you up to date with what happened in Charleston, the Charleston massacre that took place the day after I left Charleston. Baltimore, Ferguson. I was just in St. Louis. I was on the phone with Michael Brown's dad for a few minutes. I'm going to bring you up to snuff, because just like y'all got to let me know what's going on here when I come, I got to let you know what's going on there when you come. So that's tomorrow, 5 o'clock. Which West Indian Center? Canmore Road, 5 o'clock. Let me leave you with a quote from my ancestor, Frederick Douglass. And I'll be coming back to the UK in March because I want to do my Frederick Douglass play with me as Frederick Douglass. I got the wig and the clothes and everything. Before I give you this Douglass quote, I want to give you one more tenet of Garveyism, and there's so many you can't cover them in one day. But one of them is equality for women. Does anybody in here know why the white women of America got the right to vote? I want my feminists to do your research. The reason the white woman of America got the right to vote in what year? 1920. Was it a coincidence? No. If you don't believe me, do your research. White women wrote the President of the United States protesting the right not to vote because Marcus Garvey, the leader of the Negro organization, has given black women not only the right to vote, they run their own military, their own auxiliary, and this Negro requires of every division of his organization that there be a lady president next to every male president. We don't need feminism, we need womanism. African family is what we need. Frederick Douglass said, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, it never will. He said, those who are whipped the easiest are those who are whipped the most. Frederick said, for 20 years, I prayed on my knees to God for freedom, but the good Lord gave me no freedom till I got up off my knees and started praying with my feet. He said, if you want respect, stop looking for pity, because the man who pities you will never respect you, and the man who respects you has no need for pity. He said, men may not get all they work for, but you must work for all that you get. Queen Mother Harriet Tubman said, I freed hundreds of slaves, could have freed millions more, but they didn't even know they were slaves. Marcus Garvey was asked, are you an African or are you a Jamaican? Are you an African or are you a Jamaican? Are you an African or are you a Jamaican? And in response to that question, His Excellency, leader of the largest black organization in modern history, the man who gave us the red, black, and green, put ships on the water, put so much fear in the European that he had to create the Council on Foreign Relations. Garvey said, you ask me, am I an African or am I Jamaican? I answer you simply, I would never give up a continent for an island. I am an African. Yesterday, today, Ashe, Manchester.